Assalamu alaikum students, welcome back to class. This is your ENG503 Prose 2, and from what you remember of the previous lectures, we have been discussing the travelogue Gulliver's Travels written by Jonathan Swift. And in the previous lectures, what we have been discussing is how Lemuel Gulliver gets his training as a doctor, and because he cannot find patients on land, he decides to join a ship and serve as the ship's doctor. One of these voyages where he gets really tired and he wants to go back to his wife and family, and just when he has made up his mind that he will join them very soon, the vessel on which he is sailing is shipwrecked, and Gulliver finds himself on this island where they have little people 4 inches, 5 inches high, and he finds out that the land is called Lilliput, and the inhabitants, who are called Lilliputians, they find him to be a very strange person. Now, for Gulliver, it's the other way around. He finds the Lilliputians strange. They're not like the Englishmen and Englishwomen that he has left behind at home. They are different, and in explaining to us what Lilliputians are like, Jonathan Swift fulfills a twofold purpose. He is writing a travelogue, and at the same time he is trying to reform society, contemporary society, by holding up examples of the aristocracy, of the nobility, and even of the court itself, because he does not like the situation that prevailed in England in his day. And so, in an attempt to improve that, he comes up with this imaginary travelogue, and he tries to establish the authenticity of not only the different characters in Gulliver's Travels, but also the different places that he describes. And while he is describing the island of Lilliput and its inhabitants, you see that he describes not only the appearance, but also the lifestyle of the Lilliputians. And in doing that, he makes a comparison with the people back home, with the people in England, particularly the nobility. So when he's describing the emperor of Lilliput and those who are at court, he is actually trying to expose what goes on in English society in an attempt to reform that society. He doesn't want to make fun of English society for the sake of being sarcastic or for the sake of ridicule. He wants to do it so that society will be reformed. Society can look at itself as you look at yourself in a mirror. So Gulliver's Travels is a piece of writing where Englishmen and Englishwomen of Swift's time could see themselves and see what faults they had, what mistakes they were committing, what weaknesses showed to other people. So in writing Gulliver's Travels, Swift is not just giving vent to his feelings, he's also trying to reform society. Now, the place where we left off was where Gulliver and the emperor have a difference of opinion, and this difference of opinion is sort of increased by the negative stories that a couple of the emperor's courtiers are spreading about Gulliver. Gulliver has not done those things with bad intentions, but that is what he is accused of. So Gulliver has to decide what exactly he will do given the situation. We have done 6 chapters up to now, and today we'll be discussing chapter 7 and what happens in chapter 7. Okay, so chapter 7, the introduction that is given is: the author, being informed of a design to accuse him of high treason, makes his escape to Blefuscu, his reception there. This is in brief what Swift will be discussing in this chapter. And Swift or Gulliver says, before I proceed to give an account of my leaving this kingdom, it may be proper to inform the reader of a private intrigue which has been for 2 months forming against me. So this is a part of the introduction, and Gulliver says that although in this chapter I'm going to describe why and how I left Lilliput, let me first describe the situation as it pertained at that time, so that there are no readers out there who have questions that remain unanswered. So he says, before I proceed to give an account of my leaving this kingdom, let me first inform the reader of a private intrigue. Now Gulliver was aware that there was this palace intrigue against him. He knows that there are 2 people who are his mortal enemies. One is the admiral of the realm, that is Bolgolam, and the other is Flimnap. So Flimnap, the treasurer, and the admiral of the fleet, these are the 2 dire enemies that Gulliver has. The admiral of the fleet is his enemy. Can you think of a reason why he would be an enemy to Gulliver? Come on, think. We had this in the last lesson. No? Okay, I'll give you the answer. What happened was that Gulliver had single-handedly brought 50 ships from Blefuscu to Lilliput. Now that, strictly speaking, at a time of war, is the duty of the admiral of the realm. By doing this, what Gulliver was trying to tell the emperor was, oh, this is very simple, I can do it. Why could the admiral not do it? So the admiral does not like Gulliver at all, and he waits for an opportunity when he can act against Gulliver. And this opportunity is provided to him by the writer himself, and Flimnap and Bolgolam at once take advantage of this window or this opportunity that they have, and they make full use of it. Let's see how this intrigue comes about, and how does Gulliver find out that there's an intrigue going on against him. He says, I had been a stranger to courts, in the sense that he does not know what court intrigue was about. The kind of gossip and scandal mongering that went on in the area that surrounded the king or the queen. He says, I had heard and read enough of the temperaments of courtly people to want to actually want to be in that position, but circumstances made it such that even in such a remote country as Lilliput, Gulliver was able to see palace intrigues at their possibly worst. So palace intrigues in the vicinity of Gulliver is something that is new for him. And as he says, this country was governed by very different laws, very different rules from any other country in the world. When I was just preparing to pay my attendance on the Emperor of Blefuscu, a considerable person at court came to my house very privately at night in a closed chair, and without sending his name desired admittance. So what actually happens is that if you remember a couple of chapters back, I just told you that when Gulliver brings these ships from Blefuscu to Lilliput, the Blefuscudians send a delegation requesting for peace, and this delegation calls upon Gulliver and invites him to come to Blefuscu. Now, it's not easy for Gulliver to go to Blefuscu because the emperor at Lilliput is already not happy with him, and therefore he gave him permission after a long time. So now that he has permission, he wants to go to that island, and therefore he's making his preparations. But just when he's about to finalize his preparations, he finds out that he has a visitor, and this visitor happens to be very high at court. He's not going to give us the name for the simple reason that he never has. And the thing is that this individual came to Gulliver in a closed chair. Now, a closed chair is one that has curtains on the side. So, more or less what you call a palki or a tanga, not the tangas that you have these days. This was a tanga which had curtains all around it, so that you could not see who was inside, but the person who was inside could just lift the flap of the side, and he'd be able to see whatever is going on. So he says that this person came to him very late at night. He would not tell me his name, and yet he said, I want to see you. So what Gulliver does is that he dismisses everyone else, puts the chair with his lordship in it, that is that the means of transportation that is used, Gulliver picks that also up, hid them into his coat pocket, and giving orders to a trusty servant, what he wants to do is that he puts this man along with this chair or palki or tanga onto the table, and he sits on the chair beside the table so that their levels are equal. He doesn't look down on the Lilliputians, and for the Lilliputians it is the same, because they realize that Swift is not talking about let's say people who are his size. Therefore he picks up the horse carriage and he puts it on the table, and then he sits at the chair and he talks. And what is it that he talks about? He says, after the common salutations were over, observing his lordship's countenance full of concern and inquiring into the reason, he desired, and these are the quote marks. So when Gulliver puts him on the table and sits on the chair beside him, he sees that the person who is very highly placed at court is looking very concerned. And as soon as the individual can speak, he says, you know, I have something very secret and very important to tell you, but I want you to listen to me very carefully, and I want you to hear me out completely before you say anything. So you are not to react, not to make any comment. And Gulliver says that I remember everything that he told me, because as soon as that person was gone or went away, I sat down and I made notes, and the following are my notes regarding my stay at Lilliput. And this messenger, or this individual who has come from court, he starts off by saying that several people have been called to discuss this issue with the emperor. The emperor has formed committees. He has designated certain people as committee members, certain others as members whose opinion matters a lot. So a lot of discussion has been going on at court on what is to be done about Gulliver. And he says, only 2 days ago, the emperor decided finally what was to be done with Gulliver. And then this man, his lordship, tells him that Skyresh Bolgolam has been your mortal enemy almost ever since your arrival, because with the arrival of Gulliver, the importance of the other people was compromised. His importance is compromised because ever since Gulliver brought those 50 ships to Lilliput, Skyresh Bolgolam thinks that the Gulliver is trying to take his position. Now Gulliver doesn't want that, but that's how Skyresh Bolgolam sees it. So as Swift says, by this act his glory as admiral is much obscured. So this lord, in conjunction with Flimnap the treasurer, who is very angry with you because he had tried to involve Gulliver in a scandal with his wife, and when Gulliver didn't do as he wanted him to do, Skyresh Bolgolam and Flimnap were very angry. Now Flimnap was treasurer, Skyresh Bolgolam was admiral of the fleet, so two of the most important people at court, and they are against Gulliver. So what chance does poor Gulliver have? Anyway, he goes on to say that the Grand Justiciary has been prepared to accuse you of high treason. Now, high treason was always punishable by death, and that is something that will suit Skyresh Bolgolam, because he realizes that he has a lot of work to do. So he says that the articles of impeachment that are prepared against him, he wants Skyresh Bolgolam to read them out. He says, Limtok the general, Lalkan the chamberlain, and Balmuff the grand justiciary. They have all, so our equivalent of the Chief Justice. So they have all prepared these articles of impeachment that this person is going to read out now. And he's not just accusing Gulliver of being treasonous, but he's also accusing him of having committed other very important and very heinous crimes against the emperor. Now, this long speech that the individual makes, it makes Gulliver very impatient, and he's about to interrupt him when this person goes on to say that out of gratitude for the favors you've done me, I procured information. So this person also starts off by saying, you know, I've done such a wonderful job, I'm putting my own life at risk, but because of what you have done for me, I am willing to risk my life, and that is why I've come to you in the middle of the night, and I'm coming to you in a vehicle which would not be recognized again. So, articles of impeachment against Quintus Flestrin. This is the name that they give Gulliver's Travels. You need to remember this because we're going to deal with the articles one by one. So the first is that a statute or a law was passed in the reign of His Imperial Majesty, and don't miss the funny names. They sound funny to us because we have not heard them, we have not read them before we come to the book. So he says that this law was made in the reign of a previous emperor, and when it was made, the idea was that it would apply to everyone and not just to one person exclusively. You know, we have in our own country, we have what we call wall chalking. You take a piece of chalk and you can write any old rubbish on a wall. Sometimes what is written is very beneficial. Otherwise, it's punishable. So the first article that he brings out is that no one shall urinate in the premises of the palace and for a short distance. You remember that when fire broke out in the Empress's apartments, the only way that Gulliver could prevent that fire from spreading to other buildings was that he urinated on the building. So the fire went out, but everything inside was destroyed. And the Empress, since that time, had been very angry with him. So he calls him Quintus Flestrin. And the article of impeachment says that this is something that Gulliver did deliberately. It wasn't accidental. He didn't forget anything at home. He knew what was happening, and in spite of that, he put out the fire by urinating on it, and therefore he is guilty of high treason and should be put to death. Article 2 refers to the ships that Gulliver brought from Blefuscu, and says that the said Quembus Flestrain, having brought the imperial fleet of Blefuscu into the royal port, and being commanded by the emperor to seize all the other ships of the said empire of Blefuscu, and reduce that empire to a province, and to destroy and put to death not only all the big Indian exiles, but likewise all the people of the empire who did not immediately forsake the big Indian heresy. He, the said Flestrain, like a false traitor, against his most auspicious, serene imperial majesty, did petition to be excused from the said service upon pretense of unwillingness to force the consciences or destroy the liberties and lives of an innocent people. So what he's trying to tell you in these 2 or 3 slides is that when Quembus Flestrain, or the Man Mountain, or Gulliver, Lemuel Gulliver, when he refused to bring all the naval ships to Lilliput, he not only deliberately disobeyed the orders of the king, but also showed his own heretic nature by disobeying the king, disobeying him willfully, deliberately, with planning, not accidentally, not unintentionally, but intentionally he does it. Article 3, that whereas certain ambassadors arrived from the court of Blefuscu, and you see the kind of language that Swift is using here, it's very legal and very formal language, just as it is used in the proclamations in court. So whereas certain ambassadors arrived from the court of Blefuscu, this is the people who came from Blefuscu and who wanted to have a peace treaty signed, because Blefuscu was rendered overnight without any firepower, in the sense that the Blefuscudians could not have attacked, and what the emperor wanted was that they should be reduced to the status of a province, that he could govern from here. And you remember that argument over big Indians and little Indians, where there are 2 parties because of which end of the egg you break. And the emperor of Lilliput had desired that Gulliver should bring back everything in Blefuscu which gives them which gives them a chance to attack Lilliput. But of course Gulliver is not willing to do that. So that's the 3rd article. Article 4 says that the said Quembus Flestrain, and throughout it all they are referring to him as Quembus Flestrain. He says that now that the enemy has been defeated, now that the Blefuscudians have been defeated, this Man Mountain, or this Gulliver, Lemuel Gulliver, is planning to make a voyage to Blefuscu, and he should be stopped, because you don't know what he's going to to say and do there. And when he goes to Blefuscu, he's going to be helping the Emperor of Blefuscu the same way that he helped the Emperor of Lilliput. So he says these are some of the articles, but these are the most important. And what I have done is I've just read the abstract. You need to read it very carefully in order to realize what this will mean for you. Now, in the several debates upon this impeachment, it must be convinced that His Majesty gave many remarks of his great lenity. And what this person tries to tell the Emperor of Lilliput is that even if you consider these acts to have been crimes, he's done so much good for Lilliput that you really cannot forget that. So the treasurer and the admiral therefore say, okay, we are going to be very lenient with Gulliver, we're not going to hang him, we're not going to punish him for all that he has done, but we are going to find out other ways. As he says, the treasurer and the admiral insisted that Gulliver be put to death in the most painful way possible. Remember what I told you about Lilliputians being very small, but being very cunning and very wicked. So they, the Lord High Treasurer and the Admiral of the Fleet, they both say that he should be put to death in as painful a manner as possible, and one idea that they give is that his house should be set on fire, and for this purpose 20,000 men armed with poisoned arrows will go to his house when he is sleeping and fire those arrows filled with poison at Gulliver. And he says that we will also give instructions to some special servants that they should sort of put poison into his drink, into his food, so that when he takes that food in, he will die. As he says, it will want you to tear your own flesh. So physical punishment of possibly the worst kind. Okay, so this is what the emperor is planning for Gulliver, and this is what the friend at court has come to tell him. So they want to kill him in the most painful way possible, and they have absolutely no compunction. Now, what Swift is trying to do here is tell us, in a sense, that these people might be small in size, but they have huge egos. They are vicious, they are cruel. Size doesn't make any difference to your temperament or nature. And what he's trying to point out here is that this is something that kings and emperors need to control. The urge to penalize anyone whom they consider as an enemy may not necessarily be an enemy, but it is enough to be thought an enemy. So when the Lord Treasurer and the Admiral of the Fleet say that he should be put to death in the most painful way possible, by setting fire to his house, by shooting poisoned arrows at his face and hands, etc., etc., His Majesty says, no, he has done good work. He has worked for the land of Lilliput, and therefore this is not the punishment to be given out to him. So when they are discussing this, and when the king says that, you know, this is very wrong and he has done good for us and we should not kill him in the most painful way possible, Reldresal, who is, if you remember, the only friend that Gulliver has at court, he says, I have another idea, a better idea. And in this idea, what you need to do is, you need to put out Gulliver's eyes. Can you imagine how painful that would be? To actually physically destroy someone's not only eyesight, but eyes itself. So this is what he is pleading for. This is something that will be a big favor if the king adopts it. So he comes out with this point, and he says it's not because he's my friend, but the fact is that he has done a lot of good work for Lilliput and for Lilliputians. So since he has done such good work for Lilliput and Lilliputians, he should not be put to death in such an embarrassing manner. So he says, put out his eyes, but don't kill him, because whatever he wants to see, he can see through others' eyes. He doesn't really need eyes to live. And the reason that he gives is that the loss of your eyes would be no impediment to your bodily strength, so that if you make him blind, it will not make him less strong. Perhaps it will make him stronger. As he says, blindness is an addition to courage, in the sense that it conceals dangers from us. So what Reldresal has to say is that Gulliver should not be put to death. His eyes should be put out, because in any case he doesn't really need his eyes to live, and arrangements will be made for his livelihood, etc. This proposal was received with the utmost disapprobation by the whole board. Obviously, by this time the Lord High Treasurer and the Admiral of the Fleet had gotten around all the noblemen and all the courtiers. So when Reldresal presents this alternative, everyone starts to say, oh, this is too easy, this is too easy, why should we let him go, why did he come to our country, etc., etc., why does he have to eat so much, why does it take so much cloth to make clothes for him. All these things, they sort of flash through the minds of people who are listening. So nobody at court likes this proposal. Everybody starts to say, oh, this is too easy, this is too easy. And Bolgolam, the admiral, says, and you know he's one of Gulliver's die-hard enemies, and he just cannot conceal his temper, his anger, his fury, and he gets up and he says, how does the secretary dare even to suggest this, because you are a traitor. So Gulliver is a traitor in the eyes of Bolgolam, the admiral, and he says that you brought in the ships only so that you could sort of throw this at our faces, that, you know, this is what I have done, and it gives Gulliver power to have brought those 50 ships from Blefuscu. And he says you cannot forget that he urinated on the Empress's part of the palace. That's something that is just unforgivable. And what Bolgolam tries to present is that Gulliver did it deliberately. Now, if you remember the incident, Gulliver did not do it deliberately. There was no choice. He didn't have any container. The Lilliputians were trying to put out the fire, but the buildings were so far from where the water was that the water was just not doing any good at all. So Gulliver was left with no choice. But what Bolgolam, the admiral of the fleet, says that Gulliver did this deliberately, that he was planning for it, that he had been waiting for an opportunity. And he says that there's always a risk. If he can put out the fire in the palace, then he could just one day urinate so much that the entire palace would sink. Now that's a very silly reason, but Bolgolam can come up with anything, because he hates Gulliver and he will not let any opportunity go by in which he cannot somehow show how patriotic he is and how traitorous Gulliver is. So whatever Gulliver has done up to that point, he just twists it around, and he says that you did it deliberately. And he says also that there were good reasons to think you were a big Indian in your heart, and as treason begins in the heart, so he accused you as a traitor on that account, and therefore insisted that you should be put to death. So Bolgolam does not go with putting out the eyes. He says no, he has to be killed, and he must be killed in a very painful manner, in the most painful manner, because whatever he has done up to this point has been to get the favor of the emperor, and he has some hidden agenda that he is following. So the treasurer was the same opinion. Remember, they're two of a kind, Flimnap and Bolgolam. They are of the same mind, and they gather all the courtiers and all the noblemen to their side of the story, so that the secretary is the only one who's trying to speak in favor of Gulliver, and the emperor vacillates. Sometimes he says that he should be put to death, other times he says no, he's done some good work for Lilliput, so let us not kill him, etc., etc. So there's argument going on in the council. And he's against poor Gulliver losing his eyesight, because he said, you know, it's just possible that once he becomes blind, he will become even stronger. And he gives that silly example that is used in Lilliput of chicken. And he says that chicken, when they are blinded, they feed faster, then they have nothing else to do. They do not or they cannot look around, so they're eating all the time, and their bodies increase in size, the meat increases, And he says that this is what might happen to Gulliver. So he'll become even bigger, even stronger, and we cannot really afford that. So he says that we have to kill him. There's no other way out. But His Imperial Majesty, fully determined against capital punishment, was graciously pleased to say that since the council thought the loss of your eyes too easy a censure, some other way may be inflicted hereafter. And your friend the secretary, humbly desiring to be heard again, says that His Excellency, who had the sole disposal of the Emperor's revenue, might easily provide against that evil by gradually lessening your establishment, in other words, starving Gulliver to death. Can you imagine the kind of ways and means that they are thinking of? One thinks that if you make him blind, it's going to be punishment, but it's going to be very good for the country. The other says starve him to death, and that way you reduce the size of the carcass, the size of Gulliver's body, because if you remember, somewhere in the beginning they had planned to kill Gulliver, but the only thing that was stopping them was that if Gulliver dies, what are they going to do to the body? And when the body starts to decay and deteriorate, it's going to smell, and it would spread disease, because you have to remember that animal bodies, when they deteriorate, they attract insects and they attract animals. And insects and animals both can then spread the disease to other beings also. So he says that if you starve him to death, then gradually his size will be reduced, so that finally when he dies of starvation, it will not be difficult to dispose of him. By that time his body will have shrunk, and they can get 5,000 or 6,000 of Lilliputians to cut the flesh away from the bones. It will not take more than 2 or 3 days. It's cruel the way they make these plans. And you just think of the Lilliputians, who are 4 or 5 inches high. And look at the wicked and the cruel ideas that are running through their minds. Gulliver has only tried to do good for Lilliput. And just because he refuses to help the emperor in making Blefuscu into a province of Lilliput, this is what they are planning against him. One says put him to death immediately. The other says don't put him to death but make him blind. The third one says starve him to death. This is the kind of thing that they are coming up with. These are the ideas that they are coming up with, and these are 4 or 5 inches high Lilliputians. Look at the wickedness, the cruelty that runs through their mind, and that they are willing to practice. These are vicious people. So in writing this, what Swift is trying to show is that size has nothing to do with viciousness. Size has nothing to do with cruelty. You have a mind that is capable of cruelty, and no matter how small the creature may be, the desire to be cruel, to inflict pain and punishment will be there. And so this person who has come to Gulliver in the middle of the night, he says, you know, your friend has saved your life. Look at the friendship that he is showing. He's saying, starve Gulliver to death. And the emperor likes that idea, and he says, fine, that's what we'll do. We'll starve Gulliver to death. And in a few months, when he dies, then we can get 4,000 or 5,000 Lilliputians to come and cut his flesh away in pieces and go and bury it so that the animals cannot get at it. That's how vicious they are. That's how cruel they are. It was strictly enjoined that the project of starving you by degrees should be kept a secret. So they don't want Gulliver to know about it. What they're going to do is they're going to decrease his diet every day that passes. And so the court agrees to this. The court agrees to starve Gulliver to death, and once he is dead, pieces of his body can be cut away and buried. So the only person who doesn't like this plan is the admiral, that is Bolgolam, and because he is a very great favorite with the empress, so he thinks that this will be too easy. You ask me, and I think that this is way too cruel a punishment for an individual, a human being who has only done good for Lilliput, who doesn't have a single evil thought in his mind as far as Lilliput is concerned. And this is what he's forced to do. So in 3 days, your friend the secretary will be directed to come to your house and read before you the articles of impeachment. So they're going to read the whole thing out to you, and your friend will also underscore the fact that the king has been very lenient, the king has been very kind. So this is what your propaganda machinery is like. You show cruelty, you show wickedness, you show viciousness, and then you say, we are being very kind to you, we're being very lenient, and nobody in this world is more kind and more lenient than the emperor of Lilliput. So he says that in 3 days your friend will come to you and he's going to read this out to you, and that is when we're going to start the whole process. I leave to your prudence what measures you will take. So then this person who comes to Gulliver in the middle of the night, he says, now I've told you what they're planning to do. It's up to you to see how you can take care of yourself. I have warned you. I have told you what they are planning. They are planning to shoot poisoned arrows at your face and hands, because those are the only exposed parts of your body. They are planning to starve you to death. And now it is up to you to decide what you want to do. I have to go back now. This is what this secret visitor says, and Gulliver doesn't take any names. He doesn't tell us who this person is who comes in the middle of the night and wants to speak to Gulliver. So he says, I'm going to return now, and so Gulliver picks him up along with his carriage or his chair, puts him out of the house, and the individual just goes back to the palace. Now, it was the custom in Lilliput that after a decision had been made at the court, it would be made public. And how they make it public is that the emperor makes a speech to the entire council, and the speech starts off by saying, you know, I am a very lenient person, I am very kind, very generous. And you can see Swift attacking the nobility, attacking the royal family by saying that this is how kings address the council, not by saying that these are the problems and these are the solutions, but by saying, see, I'm a very kind person, I'm a very lenient and affectionate person, and therefore I say that Gulliver should not be killed, but should be starved gradually. That's so Swift is being very, very sarcastic here. The speech was immediately published throughout the kingdom, as etc., etc., and it was also spread throughout the kingdom what exact punishment is going to be given. Yet as to myself, I confess, having never been designed for a courtier, either by my birth or education, I was so ill a judge of things that I could not discover the lenity and favor of this sentence. So, Gulliver says, you know, I'd never been at court, and I couldn't see how this was lenient. To me, it sounded very cruel, it sounded inhuman, to fire arrows at a person's face and hands, arrows that are poisoned, to try to put out somebody's eyes, to try to starve someone to death. Where is the leniency? So Gulliver says, I've not been to court, but I don't understand all these things. And sometimes I thought that I would say, okay, send me to trial, I'll face the court, I'll defend myself against the charges. And then, you know, because he says that I had seen state trials, I had not gone to court, but I had seen state trials, and I had seen that the judges could not be depended on to spread justice or mercy throughout the land. I have not seen anyone pleading for mercy. The concept of mercy does not exist. As far as the courts of law are concerned, they are there only to give punishment, give penalties, not to show any mercy. So he realizes that he has to forget about resistance, because he has been made a nardac. Remember that. He has sworn that he will not work against the interests of Lilliput. These are things that he swore to in the very beginning of the voyage. And so he says that this is something that I decided that I could not do, because I had seen state trials, and I realized that as far as the judges were concerned, there was going to be no mercy. So since I did not expect any mercy from Lilliputians, I decided not to pursue a trial. And then he says that I decided that I would have to work myself for my liberty, because I knew the natures of princes and kings, and I could expect no mercy from them. So then he has another idea, and this idea is to go to Blefuscu. Remember, he has been invited earlier on by the ambassadors who come from Blefuscu. So he says, you know, I'll just move from Lilliput on to Blefuscu, so that by the time they come to me with the articles of impeachment, I'll be long gone. I will not be here. So what he does is that he makes preparations. He goes to that side of the island where you had the Lilliputian fleet. He grabs hold of a large ship, a man of war as he calls it, ties a cable to the prow, and lifting up the anchors. It's not very difficult for him. You know, the anchors are very small for Gulliver. So he lifts up the anchors, he strips himself, he puts his clothes in the ship. Remember, he's so huge, or the ship is so tiny, that he can put all his clothes in a ship. And he started wading and swimming until he reached the island of Blefuscu, where people had been waiting for him for a long time, because when they came to invite him, Gulliver had promised that he would definitely visit them. So when he saw people standing there on the shore, he asked them for guides. Two of the people consented to work as guides and took him to the capital city. And you know, Gulliver's practice was that if he wanted somebody to guide him, he would just pick them up, either put them in his pockets or hold them in his hand. And when they reached the palace of the Emperor of Blefuscu, His Majesty, attended by the entire court, came out to greet him. And of course, this is something that makes Gulliver very happy. He says, I advanced 100 yards, and when the emperor and his courtiers got off the horses, he says that I lay down on the ground to kiss His Majesty's and the Empress's hands. That's the only way that Gulliver can reach their height. And he tells His Majesty that I was come according to my promise and with the license of the Emperor my master, to have the honor of seeing so mighty a monarch and to offer him my service in my power, consistent with my duty to my own prince. So he says, you know, I have not come without permission. My emperor has given me permission, and that is why I am here today. And he doesn't make any mention of the disgrace. He doesn't mention to the Emperor of Blefuscu that he has any difference of opinion with the Emperor or with Bolgolam or with Flimnap, etc., etc., because he didn't want to spoil his own case. The Blefuscudian Emperor could have said, you know, we are on very good terms with Lilliput, or we have this treaty and therefore you must go back if Lilliputians want you. So he doesn't say anything of the disgrace that he has suffered in Lilliput. And Swift says, I shall not trouble the reader with the particular account of my reception at this court, which was suitable to the generosity of so great a prince, nor of the difficulties I was in for want of a house and bed, being forced to lie on the ground, wrapped up in my coverlet. So this is how Gulliver goes to Blefuscu, and he plans to stay there until things in Lilliput have quieted down a little. So before I say Allah Hafiz for today, let me quickly go through chapter 7 of your ENG503. This is the chapter that describes how relations between Gulliver and the Emperor have deteriorated, to the extent that the Emperor discusses with his council and decides that Gulliver is a traitor and therefore must be punished. And he discusses how best to penalize him. There are people who say that he should be put to death by firing poisoned arrows at his face and hands, and then the only person at court who is a friend says that, you know, you can do him a favor by putting out his eyes. And Bolgolam, the admiral of the fleet, and Flimnap, the treasurer, they are against it, and they say that no, he should be killed outright, because whatever he has done, he deserves to be killed. So while this is conveyed to Gulliver, he decides to make a trip to Blefuscu because that is where he has been invited. So when we end this chapter, we see Gulliver making his preparations and just swimming across the channel to the island of Blefuscu, and the kind of reception he gets there. The king comes out, the entire court is with him, and Gulliver, throughout his conversation with the Emperor of Blefuscu, hides from him the fact that he is in disgrace with the Emperor of Lilliput. Thank you, and Allah Hafiz.